English nobles laughed as they called the chained Viking Erik a savage dog. At the feast, they threw bones at his feet. When Lord Edmund's 12-year-old daughter Sarah couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "He's a human being!" her father slapped her. But 3 days later, when Sarah was captured in enemy territory, Lord Edmund's only hope was that savage dog. And the decision Erik made that day would teach all of England what honour truly means. 562, Northern England, Thornhill Castle. The great hall was filled with laughter, music, and the finest feast the region had seen in months. Lord Edmund Thornhill, one of the wealthiest nobles in the kingdom, was celebrating his latest military victory against Viking raiders. At the centre of the hall, chained to a stone pillar like an animal, stood Erik Bloodaxe, a Viking warrior, 28 years old, captured 3 weeks ago during a coastal raid. He was massive, nearly 2 meters tall, with long blonde hair matted with dirt and blood, a thick beard, and ice-blue eyes that burned with suppressed rage. Heavy iron chains bound his wrists and ankles. A metal collar around his neck was attached to the pillar. He could barely move. His once proud Viking armor had been stripped away, leaving him in torn trousers and a dirty shirt. Dried blood covered his face and chest from beatings. Lord Edmund sat at the high table, fat and arrogant, his jeweled rings catching the candlelight as he tore into roasted meat. Around him sat other nobles, their ladies and his family, his wife Lady Margaret, his eldest son Robert, 16, and his youngest daughter Sarah, 12. "Gentlemen," Lord Edmund shouted, raising his goblet, "I give you the mighty Viking, the fearsome warrior who thought he could raid English shores." The nobles erupted in mocking laughter. Erik stood silent, his jaw clenched. "Look at him now," Edmund continued, "chained like the dog he is. These barbarians think they're warriors, but they're nothing but animals." More laughter. Some nobles threw food scraps toward Erik. An apple core hit his chest. He didn't flinch. Young Sarah watched from her seat, her face growing increasingly troubled. She looked at Erik's eyes and saw something that disturbed her. Not savagery, but dignity. Despite everything, despite the chains and the mockery, the Viking stood tall. "Father," Sarah said quietly, Is this necessary?" Lord Edmund turned to his daughter, irritated. "What did you say?" "He's already captured," Sarah said, her voice small. "Do we need to humiliate him?" Edmund's face darkened. "That creature is a Viking. They burned villages, killed our people. He deserves worse than this, but silence." Edmund snapped. "You're too soft-hearted. That's why you're just a girl." Sarah fell silent, but she continued to watch Erik. The feast went on. As the nobles got drunker, their treatment of Erik worsened. Lord Edmund's friends began a cruel game. "I say we see if the savage dog can do tricks," shouted Baron William, a particularly vicious man. He threw a piece of meat onto the floor near Erik. "Fetch, dog, fetch!" The nobles roared with laughter. Erik remained motionless, staring straight ahead. "I said fetch!" Baron William shouted, throwing his wine cup at Erik. It struck his head, cutting his forehead. Blood trickled down. Still, Erik didn't move. "The dog is defiant," Edmund laughed. "Perhaps we need to train him better." He gestured to his guards. 2 large men approached Erik with whips. "No!" Sarah suddenly shouted, standing up. "This is wrong." The hall fell silent. Everyone stared at the young girl. "Sarah, sit down." Lady Margaret hissed. "No." Sarah's voice was shaking but determined. "This is cruel." "He's a prisoner, yes, but he's still a man. We're supposed to be nobles. Doesn't that mean we're supposed to be better than this?" Lord Edmund's face turned purple with rage. He stood up so violently his chair fell backward. "How dare you!" he roared. "How dare you speak to me like this in front of my guests?" He strode to Sarah, and before anyone could react, slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Sarah's head snapped to the side. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry out. "Get to your room." Edmund shouted, "Now!" As Sarah hurried from the hall crying, her eyes met Erik's for just a moment. And in that moment, something passed between them, a mutual recognition of dignity in the face of cruelty. Erik spoke for the first time since the feast began. His voice was deep, with a heavy Norse accent, but his English was clear. "The child has more honor than all of you." The hall erupted in outrage. "The dog speaks!" Baron William laughed, "and insults his betters." "I see no betters here," Erik said calmly. "I see cowards who torture the helpless. In my culture, this is the lowest form of dishonor. Your culture." Edmund spat. "Your culture is rape and pillage." "My culture," Erik said, his voice carrying across the hall, "would never hurt a child for speaking truth. My culture protects the weak. My culture knows that true strength is shown through mercy, not cruelty." "Enough," Edmund shouted. "Guards, 20 lashes! Teach this dog to keep silent!" The guards raised their whips, and as they struck, Erik didn't scream. He took every lash in silence, his eyes fixed on Lord Edmund, showing nothing but contempt. 3 days later, tragedy struck. Sarah had been riding with her brother Robert and a small guard of 6 soldiers, travelling to visit their aunt in a neighbouring estate. It should have been a safe journey. The road was well-travelled, and the guards were experienced, but they had been betrayed. A group of Scottish raiders, informed by a traitor about the route, ambushed them in a narrow valley. The fight was brutal and quick. The English guards were outnumbered 3 to 1. Robert tried to fight but was knocked unconscious. Sarah was grabbed by rough hands and thrown onto a horse. "Let me go!" she screamed, struggling. "Quiet little bird." The Scottish leader laughed. "You're worth a fortune in ransom. Lord Edmund will pay well for his precious daughter." They rode north, toward the Scottish border, with Sarah bound and gagged. Back at Thornhill Castle, a wounded soldier arrived with the devastating news. "Raiders!" he gasped, blood pouring from a shoulder wound. "They took Lady Sarah. Young Lord Robert is injured but alive." Lord Edmund went white, then red, then white again. "Where?" he demanded. "Which direction?" "North, my lord." "Towards Scotland." "At least 30 raiders." Edmund immediately called for his knights. Within an hour, 50 mounted soldiers were ready to pursue, but there was a problem. The soldier who had escaped explained, "They're taking her through the Black Hills, my lord. The terrain there is treacherous. They know paths we don't. By the time we find the right way, they'll be across the border." Edmund paced like a caged animal. "There must be a way. Someone who knows those paths." His captain of the guard, Sir Thomas, spoke quietly. "My lord, there is someone, the Viking prisoner. Vikings know these lands. They've raided through the Black Hills for years. He would know the paths." Every head turned to look at Sir Thomas. "Are you mad?" Baron William shouted. "Trust a Viking? He'd lead us into a trap. Or escape the moment we free him," another noble added. But Lord Edmund was desperate. His precious daughter, his baby girl, in the hands of Scottish raiders. He knew what happened to captive noble girls. The thought made him sick. "Bring the Viking," he said quietly. Minutes later, Erik was dragged before the assembled nobles. He was still chained, still bearing the marks of his beating, but his eyes were alert and intelligent. "Viking," Edmund said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "My daughter has been taken by Scottish raiders. They're heading through the Black Hills toward the border." "You know those paths." Erik said nothing, just stared. "I'm offering you a deal," Edmund continued. "Guide my men to the raiders. Help rescue my daughter. And I will consider lessening your punishment." Erik smiled coldly. "Lessen? You mean instead of eventual execution, perhaps just life imprisonment?" "It's better than nothing." "It's nothing. Erik said. "Why should I help you? You've treated me like an animal. You beat me for entertainment. You humiliated me for sport. Now you want my help?" Edmund's face twisted. "I could have you tortured until you agree." "Torture me, and I'll give you false information," Erik said calmly. "Lead your men in circles until your daughter is long gone. You need my willing cooperation, which means you need to offer me something worth giving it." The hall was silent. Everyone knew Erik was right. Edmund struggled with his pride, his hatred, and his desperation. Finally he spoke. "What do you want?" "Freedom," Erik said immediately. "Complete freedom. Remove these chains. Give me a horse, weapons, and supplies. Let me go, and I will bring your daughter back. Alone." Baron William laughed. "You'll just take the supplies and escape." "Perhaps," Erik agreed. "But that's your choice. Trust me or don't. But if you want your daughter back alive, I'm your best chance. This is madness." Robert, now bandaged and standing despite his injuries, shouted, "We can't trust him!" "You don't have to trust me," Erik said, looking at Robert. "But ask yourself, what do I gain by failing? If I escape and your sister dies, you'll hunt me forever. Every Viking in England will be killed in retaliation. But if I bring her back," he paused meaningfully, "then perhaps there's a chance for something better." Lord Edmund stared at Erik for a long moment. Then with visible effort he spoke. "Bring her back, alive and unharmed. Do this, and you'll have your freedom. You have my word as a noble." "Your word as a noble means nothing to me," Erik said bluntly. "But I'll do it anyway. Not for you, for her. That child showed more honor in one moment than you've shown in your entire life. She deserves better than you as a father, but she doesn't deserve to suffer for your sins." Before Edmund could respond, Erik continued, "But hear this. If I bring her back, you will release me with honor. No tricks, no betrayals. And you will give me safe passage to the coast. This I demand as my price." Edmund's jaw worked. Finally, through gritted teeth, "Agreed. Then remove these chains," Erik said. "We're wasting time." Within 30 minutes, Erik was unchained, washed, fed, and armed. He refused English armor, instead taking simple leather gear, a sword, an axe, and a hunting knife. He selected the fastest horse in the stable. "You're letting him go armed?" Baron William protested. "What choice do we have?" Edmund snapped. As Erik prepared to leave, Robert approached him. "Viking," the young man said. "If you harm my sister—" "I won't," Erik said simply. "Unlike you people, Vikings keep their word." He rode out alone as the sun set, heading north at a gallop. The Black Hills were treacherous terrain, rocky, forested with dozens of hidden paths and valleys. But Erik knew these lands. His clan had raided through here for years. He knew where the Scottish raiders would go. He rode through the night, following signs invisible to English eyes. A broken branch here, disturbed moss there, horse droppings still warm. He was closing in. By dawn he had caught up. He could see their camp in a valley below, about 30 men, rough and well-armed. And in the center, tied to a tree, was Sarah. Even from a distance, Erik could see she'd been crying 30-1. Impossible odds, Erik smiled. He'd faced worse. He spent the day observing, learning their patterns, identifying the leader. As night fell, he made his move. The first guard died silently, Erik's knife across his throat. The second never saw the attack coming. Erik moved like a ghost through the camp. Then he reached Sarah. She was sleeping fitfully, still tied to the tree. He knelt beside her, covering her mouth before she could scream awake. "Quiet," he whispered. "I'm here to rescue you." Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized him, the savage dog from her father's feast. He cut her bonds quickly. "Can you walk?" She nodded, too shocked to speak. "Then follow me." Exactly, silently. They moved through the sleeping camp like shadows. They were almost free when Sarah's foot kicked a tin cup. It clattered loudly. "Who's there?" A voice shouted, "Run!" Erik commanded. They ran, but the camp exploded into action behind them. Shouts, the sound of weapons being grabbed, horses being mounted. Erik and Sarah reached the horses, but there was only one, Erik's mount. The raiders' horses were too far away. "Get on!" Erik shouted, lifting Sarah onto the saddle. He mounted behind her and kicked the horse into a gallop. Behind them, 30 mounted raiders gave chase. The chase was brutal. Erik's horse was fast, but carrying 2 riders, while the raiders had fresh horses. "They were gaining. They're getting closer," Sarah cried. "I know." Erik shouted back. "Hold tight." He guided the horse through narrow paths, over streams, through dense forest, using every trick he knew. But it wasn't enough. The raiders were still closing. Finally, Erik made a decision. He saw a narrow canyon ahead, only wide enough for horses to pass single file. "Perfect," he muttered. He rode into the canyon. Then, at its narrowest point, he stopped. "Dismounted. What are you doing?" Sarah asked, terrified. "Giving you a chance," Erik said. He lifted her down, then slapped the horse's rump. "Go, follow the path north. It leads to an English border post 5 miles ahead. Go! But what about you?" "I'm gonna slow them down," Erik said, drawing his sword and axe. "Now go!" Sarah hesitated only a second, then kicked the horse into motion. Erik turned to face the canyon entrance. Moments later, the first raiders appeared. "There!" the Scottish leader shouted. "Kill the Viking!" They charged into the narrow canyon. But here they couldn't use their numbers. Only 1 or 2 could attack at once, and Erik was ready. The first rider charged, sword raised. Erik sidestepped, swung his axe, and the man fell. The second tried to ride over him. Erik grabbed the horse's bridle, pulled, and sent horse and rider crashing. For 30 minutes Erik held that narrow passage. Bodies piled up. The raiders couldn't get past, couldn't use their superior numbers, but Erik was tiring, taking wounds. A sword cut on his arm, an arrow in his shoulder. He was bleeding, gasping for breath. "You can't hold forever, Viking," the Scottish leader shouted. "Surrender and we'll make it quick." "Vikings!" Erik gasped, grinning bloodily. "Don't surrender." He raised his weapons for another charge, but then a sound. Horns, English horns, the border guard. One of the raiders shouted. Sarah had made it. She'd brought help. 50 English soldiers came charging up the path. The Scottish raiders, seeing they were now outnumbered and cut off, broke and fled back the way they'd come. Erik collapsed, his back against the canyon wall, his weapons falling from his hands. Sir Thomas, captain of the guard, reached him first. The Viking held this pass alone. Against 30 men? More like 40, Erik corrected weakly. Some ran away earlier. Sarah pushed through the soldiers, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me. You could have escaped, but you stayed and fought for me." "Told you." "I keep my word," Erik muttered, then passed out from blood loss. Erik woke 3 days later in a soft bed. Not a dungeon cell, an actual room with actual furniture. He sat up carefully, every muscle screaming. His wounds had been bandaged, cleaned and treated by the castle's best physician. The door opened. Sarah entered carrying a tray of food. "You're awake," she said happily. "Where am I?" Erik asked. "Thornhill Castle." "But in the guest wing, not the dungeon." She set the food down. "Father commanded you be given the best room, the best care." "Your father," Erik said slowly. "Where is he?" "He's been waiting for you to wake up." "Everyone has." You're a hero now." The soldiers who arrived at the canyon told everyone what you did, how you held off the entire raiding party alone, how you saved me. Erik was silent, processing this. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "Why did you do it?" "You could have just taken me to the border post, gotten your freedom. Instead, you nearly died. Because," Erik said quietly, "that's what honor means. Not just keeping promises when it's easy. but doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. At the feast, when father was cruel to you, you said I had honor. But you're the one with honor. You showed mercy to people who showed you none. That's the difference, Erik said, between what your father thinks is strength and what strength actually is. The door opened again. Lord Edmund entered, followed by his wife Robert and several nobles, including Baron William. Edmund looked different, smaller somehow. His arrogance had been replaced by something else. Shame. Viking, he said, his voice stiff. Erik, I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You owe me nothing except what you promised, Erik said. My freedom. You'll have it, Edmund said quickly. My word of honor. But first I need to say something. He seemed to struggle with the words. I was wrong. About you. About Vikings. About what honor means. He gestured to the scars on his arms, the bandages. You could have let my daughter die. You could have escaped. Instead, you nearly died protecting her. You showed more nobility in one night than I've shown in my entire life. I showed basic decency, Erik said. Something you need to learn. The words should have been an insult, but Edmund took them. You're right. I called you a savage dog, but the real savages were us. We were the ones acting like animals. Baron William stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Viking, Erik, I too must apologize. I threw things at you. Mocked you. I was wrong. You have more courage than 10 of our knights. One by one, the nobles who had tormented Erik apologized. Some genuinely, some clearly forced by social pressure. But they apologized. Erik listened silently, then said, Your apologies mean nothing if you don't change. It's not me you need to prove yourselves to. It's every person weaker than you, every prisoner, every servant, every person you have power over. If you treat them with dignity, then your words have meaning. Otherwise, you're still just cruel men making sounds. The shame on their faces deepened. Edmund nodded slowly. You're wise as well as brave. I would like to offer you something beyond freedom. A position, advisor, teacher. Help us learn what real honor means. Erik considered this, then shook his head. No, I need to return to my people. But I'll give you advice now, freely. Treat people as you'd want to be treated if your positions were reversed. That's the beginning of honor. He turned to Sarah. You already understand this. You'll grow into a fine woman, better than your father deserves. Sarah hugged him carefully, mindful of his wounds. I'll never forget you, never. A week later, Erik was fully healed and ready to leave. The entire castle gathered to see him off. He was dressed in new clothes, given a fine horse, weapons, supplies, and a purse of gold. To help you reach your people, Edmund explained. And as payment for what you did, Erik almost refused, then nodded. I'll accept. Not as payment, you can't pay for what I did, but as a gesture of goodwill between our peoples. He mounted his horse. Before leaving, he turned to address the assembled crowd. When I was chained in your hall, you called me a savage dog. You threw food at me. You beat me. You wanted to see me as less than human, because it made you feel powerful. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. But here's what I learned, Erik continued. Savagery isn't about culture or birthplace. It's about choices. You can choose to be cruel, or you can choose to be kind. You can choose to abuse power, or use it wisely. You can be the man who chains his enemies for entertainment, or the man who treats even his enemies with basic dignity. He looked at Edmund. You have a second chance. Your daughter nearly died because of your pride and cruelty. Learn from it. Teach your son better than you were taught. Honor isn't about defeating enemies. It's about how you treat everyone, especially those who can't defend themselves. With that, he turned his horse and rode toward the gate. Wait, Sarah called. She ran to him holding something. Take this, to remember me. It was a small wooden carving of a bird. I made it myself. It's not very good. It's perfect, Erik said gently, tucking it into his pouch. I'll treasure it. As he rode out, the entire castle watched in silence. Then slowly people began to clap. It started with the servants, the common people who had watched everything. Then the soldiers joined. Finally, even the nobles applauded. The savage dog was leaving. But he was leaving as the most honored man in the castle. 5 years passed. Sarah grew into a young woman of 17, known throughout the region for her compassion and strong moral character. She refused several marriage proposals from cruel or arrogant nobles, waiting for someone who measured up to her ideals. Lord Edmund had changed. Not completely, old habits die hard, but he no longer tortured prisoners. He treated his servants better. He listened to his daughter's counsel. The story of Erik the Viking had become legend in their household, a constant reminder. One day, a Viking ship arrived at the coast, not a raid, a trade mission, and leading it was Erik Bloodaxe, now a jarl, chieftain of his clan. When word reached Thornhill Castle, Edmund personally rode to meet him. "Erik," Edmund said, extending his hand. "Welcome." Erik shook it, surprised by the warmth. "Edmund, you look different. Older? Fatter?" Edmund laughed. "More humble," Erik said. They talked for hours. Edmund explained how the story of Erik's honor had spread, how it had changed attitudes toward prisoners, toward Vikings, even toward treatment of the lower classes. "You planted a seed that day," Edmund said. "It's growing." "Good," Erik said. "That's all any of us can do. Plant seeds. Hope they grow." Sarah arrived, now a beautiful young woman. Erik barely recognized her. "Lady Sarah," he said, bowing. "You've grown into someone who tries to live up to your example," she said. She still wore the small wooden bird he'd given her 5 years ago, now on a chain around her neck. That evening there was a feast. But this one was different. Vikings and English sat together, shared food, shared stories, laughed together. At one point, Baron William, who had been among Erik's worst tormentors, approached him. "I owe you more than an apology," William said. "You changed me. I see people differently now. Treat them differently. I'm trying to be better. That's all any of us can do," Erik said. "Keep trying. Keep being better than yesterday." As the night ended and Erik prepared to return to his ship, Sarah walked him out. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Perhaps," Erik said. "Trade continues. Peace continues. Maybe friendship continues." "I hope so," Sarah said. "You taught us something important. That honor isn't about where you're from or who your parents were. It's about who you choose to be." "You learned that lesson well," Erik said. "Now teach it to others. That's how the world changes. One person at a time, one choice at a time." He rode back to his ship under a star-filled sky, leaving behind a castle that would never forget the Viking who taught them the true meaning of honor. 10 years after that night, Lord Edmund lay on his deathbed. His children gathered around. Robert, now a lord himself, and Sarah, married to a kind man and mother of 3. "I want you to know," Edmund whispered, "the best thing I ever did was let that Viking teach me. He showed me that being noble has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with character." "We know, Father," Sarah said gently. "You taught us well." "No," Edmund corrected. "Erik taught you. I just stopped getting in the way." He died peacefully, a changed man, and far away in a Norwegian village, Erik Bloodaxe sat by his fire, holding a small wooden bird carving. He was now an old man, but still strong, still wise. His grandson asked, "Grandfather, what's your greatest victory?" "The battle where you defeated 50 men. The raid where you captured 3 ships. The duel with the champion?" Erik smiled and held up the wooden bird. "None of those," he said. My greatest victory was the day I chose honor over revenge. The day I saved the daughter of a man who treated me like an animal. Because that choice didn't just save one girl. It changed minds. It changed hearts. It proved that mercy is stronger than cruelty, that honor is more powerful than hatred. But grandfather, the boy said, they were so cruel to you. Didn't you want revenge? Of course I did, Erik said honestly. But revenge would have made me what they thought I was, a savage. By choosing honor instead, I proved them wrong. I showed them who I really was. And in doing so, I gave them a chance to become better people, did they? Some did. Some didn't, but I gave them the chance. That's all we can do. Make the right choice. Plant the seed, hope it grows. The boy thought about this. I want to be like you, grandfather. Then remember this, Erik said. True strength isn't about how many enemies you defeat. It's about how many enemies you turn into friends. Real honor isn't about never being defeated. It's about never being defeated by hatred, never letting cruelty turn you cruel, never letting the darkness of others darken your own soul. The boy nodded solemnly, understanding, and the wooden bird carved by a child's hand 15 years ago sat on the mantel, a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are won not with swords, but with choices. This story teaches us that the real savages aren't those who are different from us. They're those who choose cruelty over kindness, and power over mercy, and pride over honor. Erik was called a savage dog, treated worse than an animal, beaten and humiliated. He had every reason to seek revenge, to let Sarah die, to prove his tormentors right about Vikings being heartless barbarians. But he chose differently, and that choice changed everything. True strength isn't about dominating those weaker than you. It's about protecting them. True honor isn't about never being insulted or humiliated. It's about rising above those insults and proving through your actions who you really are. The nobles thought they were civilized because they wore fine clothes and lived in castles. But civilization isn't measured by what you wear or where you live. It's measured by how you treat those who can't defend themselves. Erik showed them that a savage chained to a pillar could have more honor than all their nobility combined. And in doing so, he gave them the chance to become better. That's the power of choosing mercy over revenge, honor over hatred. You don't just save yourself. You save everyone around you by showing them a better way. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more tales that prove character matters more than birthright, and honor means more than power. Share in the comments. What would you have done in Erik's position? And don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs to be reminded that true strength comes from the heart, not the sword. The measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals, it's how they treat those beneath them. Erik the Viking taught a kingdom this lesson. Let's never forget it.